It had been months, no, years, since I last saw the people I called family. Years since I left for deployment, knowing I was serving my country, doing my duty. But when I returned home, I didn't get the welcome I expected. Instead, as I walked through the door, I found something that froze my blood. There, scattered around my living room, were signs of another man's presence. His shoes by the door, his jacket thrown over the couch, his cologne lingering in the air. I felt my heart race, my mind racing to make sense of the situation. This couldn't be happening. I barely had time to process it before I heard a voice behind me. My daughter. I turned to see her standing in the hallway, her eyes wide in shock. Her face went pale, and before I could speak, she fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. I thought you were dead, she choked out between sobs. They buried you. They said you died years ago. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled back, my legs almost giving out beneath me. This couldn't be real. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, thought I was gone. Then came the words that hit me like a punch to the gut. Mom, remarried. She married Uncle Mark. My mind spun, trying to comprehend the gravity of what she was saying. My wife. Remarried. To my brother. I was paralyzed with disbelief. How could this happen? How could they do this to me? I didn't know what to do. Anger, betrayal, confusion, emotions all tangled together inside me. But I knew one thing. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. This wasn't my life anymore. Without thinking, I turned and ran to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. I couldn't face them, not yet. I needed time. Time to process the gut-wrenching truth that my wife, my family, had moved on. Time to plan. I hid in the closet, the darkness offering me some comfort, my mind whirling with thoughts of revenge. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to let them think they could get away with it. Not after everything. Now it's your turn. Let me know when you're ready for the next section, or if you want to adjust anything in this one. I sat in the closet, my back pressed against the cold, hard wall. My ears strained, listening for any sound that would tell me they were coming. I didn't know when, but I knew it was inevitable. My wife and my brother, my betrayers, would come home. I could feel it. The air around me was thick with tension. My fingers clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms as I replayed everything in my mind. My wife, the woman I loved, had moved on so easily. My brother, the one I trusted, had been there, right beside her, pretending to mourn me while I was dead. My daughter's sobs echoed in my mind, and my stomach twisted in guilt. She had been so young when I left. Had they really convinced her I was gone? Had they actually buried me? The thought made my blood boil, but I couldn't afford to let emotions cloud my judgment. This wasn't about her right now. This was about them, the ones who betrayed me, and I would make them regret it. I would make them understand the true cost of their actions. I heard a door creak open, followed by the sound of footsteps. My breath hitched. They were home. I could hear my wife's voice, soft and sweet, as if everything were normal, as if nothing had changed. My heart ached at the sound, but I swallowed the pain. I needed to stay focused. I can't believe he's really gone, my wife said, her voice laced with fake sorrow. It's been so hard without him. My brother's voice responded, casual and indifferent. Yeah, but we're moving forward now. It's what he would have wanted. A cold wave of rage washed over me as I gripped the edge of the closet door. I had to stay calm. I had to stay hidden. The moment of reckoning would come, but it had to be perfect. I had to let them think they were safe. I slowly slid open the closet door, peeking through the crack. I saw them, my wife and my brother, standing in the living room, their backs to me. They were so comfortable, so relaxed. The woman I loved, in the arms of the man I trusted. I felt the weight of the betrayal press on my chest, threatening to suffocate me. But I wouldn't let it. Not yet. My plan was simple. I would wait for them to get comfortable. I would wait until they felt like nothing could go wrong. And then, I would strike. I watched from the shadows, my body tense and heart pounding. My wife and brother laughed softly, their voices blending with the hum of a life I no longer recognized. They had no idea I was there, crouched in the closet, holding my rage like a weapon, ready to unleash it at the perfect moment. The conversation shifted. My wife spoke with a tone that made my stomach churn. "Mark, do you ever think about him?" "You mean John?" my brother replied, his voice devoid of any regret. "Honestly, not really. It's been years. We've built a life now, haven't we?" Her response was worse, a laugh, light and carefree, as though my existence was nothing more than a distant memory. I could feel my fists clench tighter, my knuckles aching under the strain. But I waited. This wasn't the time yet. I needed to see more, hear more, so I could make sure my revenge would be unforgettable. They moved to the couch, settling in as if nothing in the world could disturb their perfect evening. My wife leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, and I felt a pang of pain and fury. That spot used to be mine. This house used to be mine. This life was stolen from me. And then, my daughter's voice broke the moment. "Mom, Uncle Mark, can I talk to you for a second?" Her voice trembled, a mix of confusion and pain. I knew she was grappling with the impossible, my return. She wasn't ready to face them alone, and I wasn't going to let her. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" my wife asked, feigning concern as she stood and walked toward her. I heard my daughter take a shaky breath. I saw something earlier. Someone." Her words hung in the air, and I could feel the tension rise in the room. "Who did you see?" my wife asked, her voice sharp, almost panicked. My daughter hesitated, then whispered, "Dad." The silence was deafening. My wife froze, her body stiff. My brother stood abruptly, his face pale. "That's impossible," he said quickly. "John's gone. You know that." "No," my daughter replied firmly. "I saw him. He was here." This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I stepped out of the closet, my footsteps deliberate and slow, letting the weight of my presence fill the room. "You didn't just see me," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I'm here." Their heads snapped toward me, their faces contorting into shock and terror. My wife stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. My brother looked like he had seen a ghost. "Surprised?" I asked, my voice dripping with venom. "You should be. After all, you buried me, didn't you?" The room fell silent, the weight of my words crashing down on them like a thunderstorm. My wife's face turned ghostly pale, her lips trembling as if she couldn't decide whether to scream or faint. My brother, Mark, stood frozen, his eyes darting between me and the door, like a rat trapped in a cage. "John," my wife stammered, taking a hesitant step back. This can't be real. You're dead." "Dead?" I said, a bitter laugh escaping me. "You wish. Or maybe that's what you told everyone to cover up your lies. I've seen betrayal before, but you two, you take it to a whole new level." My daughter stood in the corner, her face streaked with tears, torn between shock and relief. But I wasn't done, not even close. "You think you can just erase me?" I continued, my voice rising. "Fake my death, bury an empty casket, and build your little fantasy life? Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Mark finally found his voice, though it was shaky and weak. "John, listen, it's not what it looks like. We thought you were dead. The military told us you weren't coming back." "Save it," I snapped, cutting him off. "You didn't waste any time, did you? Moving into my house, sleeping in my bed, taking my wife." My glare turned to my wife. "And you, how could you do this to me? To our daughter?" Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "John, please, I thought I had lost you forever. I didn't know what to do." Before I could respond, my daughter, still crying, blurted out something that stopped all of us cold. That's not even the worst part. We all turned to her, and I saw the anguish in her eyes. Her hands shook as she pointed at Mark. He wasn't just replacing you, Dad. He's been lying to Mom, too. My wife whipped her head toward Mark, confusion and panic etched on her face. What is she talking about? Mark stammered, stepping back as if he could escape the truth. I don't know what she means. She's just confused. But my daughter wasn't having it. No, I'm not. I heard him on the phone last week. He's been seeing someone else. Mom, he's cheating on you too. The room erupted into chaos. My wife's sobs turned into shrieks as she lunged at Mark, her fists pounding against his chest. You're disgusting! I gave up everything for you! Mark tried to defend himself, but his excuses only added fuel to the fire. I stood there, watching the house of cards they had built crumble before their eyes. And then, with deliberate calmness, I said, Seems like karma doesn't take sides, does it? As they screamed and argued, I walked to the door, pausing only to look at my daughter. Pack your things. We're leaving. You don't deserve to be part of this mess anymore. She hesitated for only a moment before running to her room. My wife and brother barely noticed as I stepped outside, breathing in the cold night air. My revenge wasn't just in the confrontation. It was in watching their perfect little world burn to the ground. As I waited outside for my daughter, leaning against the railing of the porch, the memories I'd buried for years began to surface. The story of how I died wasn't as simple as they made it seem. It all started during my deployment. My unit was sent into a dangerous operation, one that went horribly wrong. We were ambushed, and the chaos left many of us wounded and separated. I was critically injured, left behind in enemy territory. For days, I clung to life, hiding and hoping for rescue. Eventually, local villagers found me, nursed me back to health, and kept me hidden until I could make contact with my base. But by the time I was rescued and brought back to safety, my identity had been marked as deceased. It was a clerical error, one that had devastating consequences. The military informed my family of my death, and by the time the mistake was discovered, months had passed. When I finally reached out to the military to correct the record, I was told something I couldn't believe. My wife had already moved on. She hadn't even waited long enough for my memory to fade before marrying Mark. The betrayal cut deep, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. I reached out to Mark first, thinking he would help me handle the situation delicately. Instead, he begged me not to return, claiming my wife was too fragile to handle the shock. She's happy now, John, he said. Don't ruin it. That's when I knew. He wasn't trying to protect her. He was protecting himself. He had taken everything from me, my wife, my daughter, my life. So I made a choice, a painful one. I decided not to return, not until I had a plan. I spent years rebuilding my strength, getting back on my feet, and preparing for the day I would reclaim what was mine. But as time passed, anger turned into resolve. I didn't just want to confront them. I wanted to destroy the lie they had built together. When I finally returned to the house that was once mine, the sight of Mark's belongings confirmed my worst fears. But seeing my daughter and hearing her cry for me shattered what little restraint I had left. That's why I couldn't stay hidden any longer. Now, as I stood there waiting for her to join me, I realized my return wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back what mattered most, my daughter's trust and the life I had been robbed of. The cool night air wrapped around me as I stood on the porch, staring into the dark sky. Each breath felt heavy, weighted by the emotions I'd suppressed for years. My chest tightened, the fury that had fueled my return now mixing with something deeper, grief, longing, and a pain I hadn't let myself feel until now. I thought about all the moments I had missed, my daughter's birthdays, her first day of school, her teenage milestones. I had imagined those moments countless times during deployment, holding on to the hope that I'd come home to them. But instead, I came back to this, a life that had moved on without me. The door behind me creaked open, pulling me from my thoughts. My daughter stepped out, her small suitcase dragging behind her. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. She looked so much like her mother, yet in that moment, I could see her pain mirrored mine. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." I crouched down to meet her gaze, my hands resting gently on her shoulders. "I know, sweetheart," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "This isn't your fault. None of it is." "But I believed them," she sobbed. "I believed you were gone. I stopped hoping you'd come back. How could I do that?" My heart ached at her words. I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly as she cried into my chest. "You were a child," I said, my voice breaking. "You trusted the people who were supposed to protect you. That's not on you, it's on them." Her small frame shook as she clung to me, and I realized just how much she had carried alone. The lies, the betrayal. It wasn't just my burden. It had crushed her too. "I missed you so much," she whispered. "Every day I missed you." I closed my eyes, willing the tears to stay back. "I missed you too. More than you'll ever know." We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, two broken souls trying to find solace in each other. The anger I had felt earlier had dulled, replaced by a fierce determination to rebuild what we had lost. Finally, she pulled back, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her jacket. "What happens now, Dad? Where do we go?" I stood, placing a hand on her head. "We start over," I said firmly. "Somewhere far away from this mess. We don't need them. We have each other, and that's enough." As we walked away from the house, leaving the chaos behind, I felt a strange sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, I wasn't walking it alone. As my daughter and I drove away from the house, the tension in the air began to lift, but I wasn't finished yet. They thought they could erase me, take my life, and get away with it. They were wrong. My daughter deserved justice for the lies she was fed, and I deserved closure for the betrayal I endured. I pulled the car over a few miles down the road and turned to her. "Sweetheart, I need you to trust me one more time. Can you do that?" She nodded, her eyes still shimmering with tears. "What are you going to do?" "End this once and for all," I replied, my voice steady. "But first, I need you to stay with someone safe. I'll pick you up as soon as it's done." I dropped her off at an old friend's house, someone I knew I could trust, and drove back to my former home. The lights were still on, and I could hear the muffled shouts of my wife and brother arguing. They were unraveling already, but I was about to push them over the edge. I knocked on the door. My wife answered, her face pale and tear-streaked. "John, please," she began, but I raised a hand to silence her. "Save your breath. I'm not here to listen to your excuses. I'm here to deliver the consequences." I stepped inside, holding a manila envelope that I'd prepared before my return. Mark was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands, but he straightened up when he saw me, his expression a mix of anger and fear. "Mark," I said, tossing the envelope onto the table, "you've always been good at taking what isn't yours, so I figured I'd return the favor." "What are you talking about?" he snapped, his voice shaking. "That," I said, pointing to the envelope, "is a complete audit of every financial transaction tied to this house and my accounts. Turns out you've been quite liberal with my money since my death. Fraud, embezzlement. It's all there." Mark's face turned ghostly white. "You wouldn't." "Oh, but I already did," I said, a smirk tugging at my lips. "The authorities have been notified. You should expect a visit very soon." I turned to my wife, who looked like she was about to collapse. "And you? You'll be receiving divorce papers tomorrow. You're not getting a penny from me, not after what you've done. Good luck explaining all of this to your neighbors and the daughter you lied to for years." Her knees buckled and she sank to the floor, sobbing. Mark tried to protest, but I silenced him with a glare. "You destroyed my life," I said, my voice low and cold. "Now I've destroyed yours. Enjoy the fallout." I walked out without looking back, the sound of their despair echoing behind me. I picked up my daughter and drove us to a small diner on the outskirts of town. Over plates of pancakes and hot cocoa, we talked, really talked, for the first time in years. "I'm sorry for everything you went through," I said, reaching across the table to hold her hand. "I should have come back sooner." "It's not your fault, Dad," she said, her voice steady now. "We both lost so much, but we have each other now. That's what matters." Her words filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I felt hope. We made plans for a fresh start in a new city, away from the lies and betrayal. As we drove toward our new beginning, the weight on my chest began to lift. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was ours to walk together. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. Thank you for watching, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do so and press the notification bell. This way, you'll stay updated with more shocking real-life stories.